Cubism was the first abstract art style. It began in 1907 and was very popular during the early part of the 20th century and had its origins in France and Spain. The movement largely ignored perspective and tried to show objects or people in several different angles. The Cubist painters were also influenced by Native American and African art. Their works often featured cubes, cones, spheres, cylinders, and sometimes used collage techniques. There were three artists who were most important to the Cubism movement: Pablo Picasso, George Braque, and Juan Gris. And now, Pablo Picasso painting. Analytic Cubism, which was from 1909 to 1912, is a style of painting Picasso developed with George Braque. Using monochrome brownish and neutral colors, both artists took apart objects and analyzed them in terms of their shapes. Picasso and Braque's paintings at this time share many similarities. Synthetic Cubism, which was from 1912 to 1919, was further development from the genre in which paper-cut fragments, often wallpapers, or portion of newspaper pages, were pasted in compositions, making the first use of collage and fine art. Most Cubist works are immediately recognizable due to their flattened, nearly two-dimensional appearance, and inclusion of geometric angles, lines, and shapes, and a fairly neutral color palette. As the movement evolved, color, texture, and graphic elements, like text, were added, to the point where later Cubist works often appeared more like collages than anything else. But Cubism wasn't a specific style or look. It actually allowed artists an entirely different way of seeing and depicting real-life objects. Unlike traditional still lifes, landscapes, or portrait paintings, Cubist paintings aren't meant to be realistic or lifelike in any way. Instead, the artist will piece together fragments from different vantage points into one painting. In doing this, the artist is attempting to give a fuller, more detailed explanation of the subject, breaking past the barriers of space and time. This type of cubism is called analytic cubism, and is usually what comes to mind when people think of Cubist art. Synthetic cubism, on the other hand, was a natural extension of analytic cubism. Instead of breaking a subject down into pieces, it involved assembling pieces already available into a collage. Synthetic cubism is still fairly geometric, and some pieces incorporate traditional media as well as found objects. The most famous Cubist is probably Picasso, with Braque at a distant second, even though he was just as instrumental as Picasso was in founding Cubism. Other Cubists include Juan Gris, whose work seemed to almost bridge Cubism with Art Deco, and artists like Marcel Duchamp, whose work actually spanned a variety of styles and movements. The Spanish artist Juan, a friend and neighbor of Picasso in Paris, refined the Cubist vocabulary into his own instantly recognizable visual language. He is often referred to as the third Cubist. At first, Gris painted in a style of analytical cubism, a term he himself later coined, but after 1913, he began his conversion to the synthetic cubism, of which he became a steadfast interpreter with extensive use of collage. Unlike Picasso and Braque, Gris painted with a bright, harmonious colors in daring, novel combination. Juan Gris was more calculating than any other Cubist painter in the way he composed his pictures. Every element of a painting was considered with classical precision. Line, shape, tone, color, and pattern were carefully refined to create an interlocking arrangement, free from any unnecessary decoration or detail.
June 1907. In less than a year, the Paris art scene would erupt in an out-and-out revolution, which would later come to be known as the Cubist movement. This art movement spanned about 7 years, but its influence has stretched far beyond that time. As artist Marius de Zayas later wrote, Cubism is not either a seed or a fetus, but an art dealing primarily with forms, and when a form is realized, it is there to live its own life. Cubism was perhaps one of the most complete and certainly the most radical and influential art movement of the 20th century. Despite the initial outraged reaction towards Cubism, this movement has changed the course of art history through its powerful and revolutionary concepts and has brought about a lasting reform in the art world. In the decades before the Cubist movement, the previously accepted definition of art had been challenged over and over again by the work of artists such as the Fauvists and the Impressionists, who believed that traditional forms of art had been exhausted and that interpretation and representation should be valued over realistic quality. These artists were known as the avant-gardes and were regarded with certain notoriety by mainstream society. In the years before Cubism, the art world was holding its breath, awaiting the next movement that would disturb the peace. At the same time, the world was undergoing an unprecedented technological revolution, which had begun in the mid-1800s and would last up to the beginning of the First World War. New inventions, such as photography and locomotives, were changing the way that artists, writers, and musicians perceived the world. The world was moving forward at a breakneck speed. Art could no longer be only an imitation of nature. Reality would have to be expressed in new ways. Cubism was pioneered by artists Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso. Their collaboration began in 1907 when Braque and Picasso were first introduced to each other and lasted until the outbreak of World War I in 1914. As Braque later recalled, in those years Picasso and I said things to each other that nobody will ever say again, that nobody could say anymore. It was rather like a pair of climbers roped together. In their years of partnership, Braque and Picasso explored the theories and techniques of artists such as Paul Cézanne, as well as concepts derived from African art. Using the idea of representing figures as basic geometric shapes from Cézanne's work, and the inspiration of distorting facial features from African masks, Braque and Picasso developed their own form of art, Cubism. These two artists believed that in order to completely reveal the truth about a subject in a painting, an artist must not merely give a visual representation of reality, but paint the subject in all of its different perspectives, sometimes distorting its form until it was completely unrecognizable. The complete distortion of reality was a concept entirely new and revolutionary to the art world. As art historian Herschel B. Chips said, renewing his work, Picasso inevitably had to give us a view of the world which did not conform to the vision we had learned. The invention of Cubism liberated artists such as Braque and Picasso, as they could now create their art in a way that represented what they knew and interpreted their subject as, instead of merely producing an accurate copy of reality. This concept was extremely advanced at the time of the Cubist movement, and there were some who doubted that Cubism would be taken seriously. As a critic of Braque's work remarked, "Let us not make fun of him, let us wait and see." Over the following months, Cubists gathered in informal groupings to exhibit their paintings in the salons. However, Braque and Picasso were not among these artists. They were forbidden by their art dealer, Daniel Henry Kahnweiler, to publicly exhibit their work. Kahnweiler believed that Cubism was to be taken very seriously, and he felt that the public was not yet ready for such an advanced concept. There were other artists, however, who had seen Braque and Picasso's Cubist works and believed that Cubism could have a great impact upon the art world if it were allowed to do so. So as Braque and Picasso continued to explore the concepts of abstraction, these artists began to produce works that they felt the public would be able to accept. But much to the disgust of many of these painters, the Parisian society reacted passionately against this provocative new movement. The Cubist paintings exhibited in the Autumn Salon were met with skeptical reviews and mocking caricatures. As art critic Gelett Burgess wrote, "One cannot view such an exhibition calmly. One must inevitably take sides for or against such work. The revolt is too virulent, too frenzied to be ignored." Cubism dramatically impacted the way that people thought about the meaning of art, forcing them to question the very basis of pictorial representation, and these people were often uncomfortable with being confronted with such a bold statement. The news of this controversial new movement spread rapidly, and within a few years, collectors and artists all across Europe and in the United States had seen paintings created by Cubists, and they responded with the same initial shock and outrage as the Parisians had. As the extent of its influence grew, Cubism was becoming more than just another radical new movement. It had begun to change the art world in ways that no one had ever anticipated. As Cubism's influence spread across Europe and to the United States, the movement's powerful and flexible concepts led to the reform of Western painting. Artists, recognizing the movement's potential, gathered in new groupings to further explore Cubism's revolutionary ideas. The immediate result of such gatherings was the forming of movements such as Czech Cubism, Suprematism, and Futurism. Cubism continued to influence the art world long after the movement was over, for it had opened the way to abstraction for artists to come, and many later art movements, such as Dadaism and Neoplasticism, derived their conception from the Cubist movement. As art historian John Richardson wrote, "There's no question about it, Cubism engendered every modern movement." The Cubist movement led many artists to challenge the boundaries of art, and it has shown the world that art exists not to be accepted without question, but rather to be continuously moved forward. Cubism has not only influenced the way people think about art, it has also changed the political views of its audience. An example of this is Pablo Picasso's work, Guernica, which was painted after the bombing of a small Spanish town in 1937. Painted in the Cubist style, Guernica was exhibited at the Paris International Exposition during the 1937 World's Fair and has become a disturbing political statement that has reached out to many people about the atrocities of war. Cubism has brought about a lasting reform in art through its powerful and revolutionary concepts and left behind a legacy that has changed the art world forever. In 1914, the outbreak of the First World War interrupted the Cubist movement, as many French Cubists were called to the front lines. It would take many years before modern art would begin again. But even so, Cubism has made a lasting impression upon the art world through its powerful and revolutionary concepts. The Cubist movement reformed Western painting and is recognized today as a pivotal point in art history that has allowed many later artists, such as Casimir Malevich, Marcel Duchamp, and Jackson Pollock, to showcase their talents in a more accepting and enlightened world. Cubism has woven its way into aspects of our everyday culture, such as fashion, architecture, and interior decorating. The Cubist movement has opened the eyes of artists, patrons, and viewers alike, leading the way in breaking down the boundaries of traditional painting so that art can be viewed in a fresh new perspective. The impact of Cubism upon the art world is enormous, and without the revolutionary concepts that had originated from the Cubist movement, the world would still be blind to the truth that lies beneath the facade of reality.
The Cubist break with tradition of imitation of nature was completed in the works of Picasso, Braque, and their many groups of followers. While few painters remained faithful to Cubism's rigorous tenets, many profited from its discipline. Although Cubist groups were largely dispersed after World War I, their collective break from visual realism had an enriching and decisive influence on the development of 20th century art. It provided a new stylistic vocabulary and a technical idiom that remains forceful today. Analytic Cubism was the first Cubism movement from 1908 to 1912. During this time, Picasso and Braque pulled an object apart by depicting it from all possible angles in just one flip. Color was de-emphasized by analytic Cubists, who used dark and monochromatic schemes. This was a major shift for Braque, who had been a Fauvist, a movement that exaggerated color. As opposed to analytic Cubism, which deconstructed one object, synthetic Cubism brought multiple objects into one perspective simultaneously. Synthetic Cubism marked the first time techniques like collage, decoupage, and stuffed paper, which were seen as art, as opposed to craft. While Picasso and Braque continued to work in Cubism during this synthetic period, the Spaniard Juan Gris joined them and became an important contributor. Before the 20th century, art was recognized as an imitation of nature. Paintings and portraits were made to look as realistic and three-dimensional as possible, as if seen through a window. Artists were painting in a flamboyant Fauvism style. In 1907, Pablo Picasso created a painting depicting 5 women whose bodies were constructed of geometric shapes and heads of African masks rather than faces. This new image grew to be known as Cubism. Cubism changed the way art was represented and viewed. Thank you for watching my video on Cubism. I hope you understand it now better than you did before. Please enjoy the Cubist artwork for the remainder of the video. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.
No way out. No